now is Maya MacGuineas. She's the president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Maya, thanks so much for being here with us. I want to go back to what we started our broadcast with about these comments from Warren Buffett on tariffs, calling them a big mistake. Do you agree with his assessment?
Well, I thought it was really interesting that he chose to focus on that, and it sort of reflects that some people see the world right now as a zero-sum game. We win, you lose. And he was really reshifting that into there are so many win-win scenarios, and that trade absolutely can be one of them. I took his comments to be very much about foreign policy, where he was not speaking just about the pure economics of trade imbalances one way or another, but he was talking about the need for a cooperative approach and attitude that we have with the world around us, and basically emphasizing that shared prosperity is one of the keys to our national security and our safety at home. He, in fact, has worried about trade imbalances to some extent in the past when he talked about import certificates and other things. And here, I think he was really saying this is broader than just economics, broader than just fiscal. It's about national security, and the posture that we are engaging with he clearly doesn't think is the right approach. And I would say that there's a strong argument to what he's saying, that we are alienating many allies in a way that is unclear what the motivation behind that could be.
And just yesterday, President Trump released his budget proposal. In that, he called for $163 billion to be cut from non-defense and domestic programs. That includes climate research, some education funding, as well as NIH and CDC. What kind of impact? Now, again, just to tell people, this is just kind of a starting point, a roadmap, if you will. Obviously, Congress is going to be the one that sorts all of this out. But what kind of an impact could a budget proposal like this have?
Well, it's really hard to even know, because it's not even a budget proposal. It's a partial proposal. So it doesn't look at the entire budget. It looks at 1/4 of the budget. And the whole point of a budget, right, is to look at the federal government's finances in whole, comprehensively, look at our priorities, look at the fiscal situation, make some decisions. But it's merely looking at 1/4 of the budget and for 1 year. And so the message that you get from that portion, $163 billion in cuts, that's very large compared to what we normally see, where we would see growth. But there's already a missing piece of this picture, which is at the same time, the reconciliation bill that they're looking at would actually pump up spending so that it would actually not have those cuts. It would be much more close to flat. So it's very difficult if you don't look at a budget all over comprehensively to know what the storyline is. I think one of the big takeaways, clearly, he emphasizes more on national security, less in other areas. But let's keep in mind, this is not the way the budget's going to end up being passed. It's very difficult to get anything like that, I'd say impossible, through Congress. And the sad truth is we may end up just having a continuing resolution, which is what we do every year, because this country really has become out of the habit of budgeting, which is very dangerous at a time like this.
And look, you put within all of this, in addition to the cuts they want to make, are the tax cuts that they'd like to re-up that they put through in his last term. What kind of impact to the budget do extending those tax cuts, either extending them or making them permanent, what kind of impact might that have?
That's right. And I think that's a much bigger story than what this sort of partial budget is going to be, because they are talking about massive amounts of new borrowing. Merely extending the tax cuts will add about $4 trillion to our borrowing over the coming decade, at a time when we already have near record levels of debt and our deficits. We're borrowing about $2 trillion a year. So this would add to this. And at the same time, the spending cuts that both the House and the Senate are talking about, and they are on very, very different paths, the two of them, would not offset those tax cuts at all. So really what they're talking about is a plan that would extend tax cuts and add to our debt, in fact, balloon our debt at a time when we should only be passing legislation, I would argue, that would make fiscal improvements, not things that would make it worse. The bills they're talking about would make it significantly worse.
And that's where the Republicans are going to have to sort this out internally, right? Because we've had on our program some Republicans who say, I'm really concerned about debt and what's happening here. And they're worried about, what this might mean for that. And it's not a lot of them, but with those tiny little majority that they have in the House, that, they could throw a wrench in all of this. And I think it's the Republicans are trying to kind of balance out, if you do care about the debt and you continue to say that that's a priority, how do you square all of this?
It is so true. Now that they're getting into the nitty-gritty, this is getting really difficult because it's very easy when it comes to talking points to talk about fiscal responsibility. And pretty much everybody will say they worry about these issues, and they should. There are a number of reasons they're dangerous for our economy, for our national security, for our ability to respond to recessions. But it's turning out that there's only a small handful of members on the Republican side during this tax bill who are really committed to doing it in a fiscally responsible way. And you have probably a much larger group of people who talk a lot about fiscal responsibility, want to extend all the tax cuts and then some, and at the same time are saying, but we're not really comfortable with these spending cuts. And that's the issue about budgeting. And I worry this country is so out of habit of even budgeting at all that we don't know that. But if you want to cut taxes, you will have to cut spending, and that's not easy. Just like if you want to raise spending, you need to find ways to raise taxes to cover it. Also not the easiest thing to do. We're very accustomed to only talking about the easy parts, and they're grappling with the real budget questions because they have goals of $2 trillion in savings to achieve, which is a lot of savings. And it's turning out that that small group of members that cares about this issue, it's smaller than one would hope if you're worried about our national debt, but they could really throw some sand in the gears if they don't come up with a plan to minimize the borrowing that these bills would have.
Yeah, there's so many pieces.
It's not going to be
this.
easy.
Yeah, no, it certainly
so
is not.
Pieces.
Yeah. All right, Maya, thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Still